talks on the 2020 Summer Read Program. Selection, the book is entitled Option B, Facing Adversity, Building Resilience, and Finding Joy by Sheryl Sandberg and Adam Grant. This powerful, inspiring, and practical book focuses on building resilience and moving forward after life's inevitable setbacks, including the current COVID-19 crisis. Summer Read is a collaboration of WITF's Transforming Health, WellSpan Health, and over 80 libraries in central Pennsylvania. For more information about Transforming Health, visit transforminghealth.org. And now I would like to introduce everyone to Dr. Michael Diller. Dr. Diller is a licensed psychologist and director of WellSpan Employee Assistance Program. He earned his bachelor's degree from the University of Pittsburgh, a master's degree in clinical psychology from Loyola College in Maryland, and a doctor of psychology degree in clinical psychology from the University of Hartford. He spent 19 years in the clinical practice, 15 of those years at WellSpan Behavioral Health, which is now known as WellSpan Philhaven. Dr. Diller served as a clinical supervisor from 2006 to 2016, overseeing clinical operations of WellSpan Behavioral Health Meadowlands outpatient office. He has been with WellSpan Employee Assistance Program since 2016 and has been passionate about finding better ways to support our fellow coworkers, raising awareness of mental health issues in the workplace, and offering ways we can provide a culture of caring to support well-being. Dr. Diller has also developed a growing curiosity and interest in leadership development, particularly with the key attributes of what makes a great leader. Welcome, Dr. Diller.
Thank you, Susan. It's wonderful to be here. I guess that's the official start of where we go from here. And I so appreciate everyone just joining us this evening. It's an honor to be a part of the work with the library system, York County Libraries, and then also just a collaboration with WITF, Capital Blue Cross, also WellSpan. Abby Kramer is with us. She is going to be driving in terms of the PowerPoint, so I appreciate Abby being a part of this. My goal tonight is really just to provide a little kind of foundation on the topics of grief and loss, also kind of through the lens of COVID-19, as that continues to unfold with the ongoing uncertainty that surrounds us all. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to start here by kind of setting the stage. Thank you, Abby here. And this is our first slide that I'm going to share with you. So setting the stage, this really talks about just kind of what do we need? So what are our needs? So this, for those who have taken psychology courses in the past, this is from Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you take a look at this, this is a pyramid of just kind of human needs, and starts on the bottom pyramid, kind of our bare basics of the food, water, warmth, and rest, and then moves up to the next level of security and safety, and that third level of belongingness and our love needs. That's our relationships with significant others and the people in our circles that support us, and we support them. Moving into just kind of those that next level of esteem and accomplishments, those kind of that sense of competence of what we're doing every day, all the way really trying to get to that top level of reaching our best selves, our full potential. But right now, sometimes we just need to start right there at the very bottom, and everything else rests upon the bottom foundation of those bare basic needs. So I just wanted to kind of share that as a kind of a context of understanding of where, just as fellow human beings, we just kind of start and where we'd like to go and what factors play a role in that. So Abby, can we go to that next slide, please? So when we think about grief and loss, often people think about death and dying. and losing someone who has passed away. That is absolutely the case. And right now, and that was really the driving force behind Sheryl Sandberg writing her book, Option B, along with her friend, Adam Grant, who was part of that kind of co-authoring. And Sheryl suddenly lost her husband tragically. So that was the driving force behind Option B. But as you've read the book and there are so many examples of adversity and challenge that people face, and there's grief and loss that go with that sometimes. Right now during COVID-19, there's so much happening because we don't have a clear idea of when all of this ends. When does this uncertainty end as it continues to unfold? We've lost many things, many of us, and it doesn't matter who we are, where we live. Some of the losses have been significant, great, and tragic. Others can fall across the continuum to what may seem like maybe small to some others, but for an individual going through these different losses, it can be quite great and challenging to overcome. So, loss of control, loss of predictability, loss of the way life was just prior to 6 months ago, before the pandemic really set into our country. There has been loss of life. 185,000 Americans have now died due to COVID-19 in 6 months. So that's a sobering statistic. And so there's grief and loss across many different areas, loss of housing, loss of food security, loss of jobs, loss of income. So when we start to list these things, each one of us, no matter who we are, has a unique journey, our own, relative to our own path. And COVID-19 has made a significant impact on that. Aside from that, life has continued to unfold, and there have been other challenges and stressors that we have faced. And so all of this speaks to this quote that I want to share with you. David Kessler is a world-renowned expert in grief and loss. He and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, so people will say the stages of grief. We'll get to that in a second. I know of those. We learned about those in school somewhere along the way, but those stages were developed by Kubler-Ross, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, in the work with David Kessler. David Kessler then, and I'll get to that in a second, but also then furthered that, and I'll speak to that. But this was something that really resonated with me. So this quote, he, during a conversation he was having on one of the podcasts I saw early on in the pandemic, he talked about, so the greatest loss, what is the greatest loss? Whose loss is the greatest? And he said, the greatest loss is your loss. Each person's grief is as unique as their fingerprint. The need is for someone to be fully present to the magnitude of their loss without trying to point out the silver lining. So Abby, if we can go to the next one. I thought that was really, really powerful because it leaves the door open for us, fellow human beings and neighbors with one another, to consider what it might be like to walk in someone else's shoes, to have some empathy for their story, and then to also realize that whatever their losses may have been or are right now, they're unique to themselves, and we need to be able to support one another to help each other get through those. So 6 stages of grief. I just was referring to the stages of grief. Originally there were 5, and it started with anger, and then, denial, and then anger, and then bargaining. Sometimes people are on, what is bargaining? Denial and anger seem to be pretty self-explanatory. Bargaining is typically when someone starts to say, you know what, and sometimes people will turn to faith. They will say, I'm gonna, they may turn to, to look up and say, God, if you help me out here, then I will do these things, and I will do this. If you help me here, then I will do these. It's this bargaining that happens during the grief and loss process. Then there's also sadness that comes with this. And then ultimately, again, this is a theory, kind of a model of then finding acceptance, to accept that of what has happened, not necessarily meaning that they're okay with it, that they agree with it. They may never be okay with what happened, but finding acceptance. You see the arrow on meaning. That's the 6th stage of grief. David Kessler came in after Kubler-Ross had passed away and continued her work. And the previous slide talked about being in the moment when you are experiencing grief and loss, kind of meeting yourself where you are at the moment, acknowledging that, and then the work then begins to move from there. Meaning does not happen immediately. Sometimes it may be a struggle to find meaning out of some type of tragedy for years at times, but meaning is something that does happen. The quote that I shared with you from David Kessler, in the moments when grief is right there in front of you, he points out that you're not looking for the silver lining then. You're just trying to be in the moment where you are and then move forward from there. These stages are not linear, meaning that, okay, stage 1, denial, stage 2, anger. Now I'm moving into bargaining, and now I'm going to move into sadness. They're fluid. They move back and forth. So you may progress and move in and out of these different stages at different times. And so there's not one, that's why you see the arrows going kind of both ways. So there's not one direction, and it's not sequential, meaning that I'm now moving on to another stage. You can move and vacillate back and forth. So can we go to the next one, Abby? Thank you. In the book early on, and this theme from Sheryl, Sandberg, and Adam Grant throughout the book is interwoven through much of the chapters. So the 3 Ps of grief and loss. This is important. So Martin Seligman is one of the premier experts in positive psychology. And he talks about how kind of your mindset is and your self-talk and how that influences what happens next, how you feel, how you think, and then ultimately how you behave. So in terms of, in this case, with grief and loss, how you respond to grief and loss. Now he says 3 Ps can get in the way and stunt recovery, kind of slow it down after a traumatic event and loss. The first P is personalization. That belief that for some reason or reasons we feel that we're at fault, something we did, something we could have maybe done to prevent a tragedy from happening. We tend to move into that area of the first P, personalization. Second one is pervasiveness. It's that belief that what has happened will impact every fabric and part of my life, all areas. Now, in the immediate kind of aftermath of a traumatic situation, a loss, that may seem like absolutely that's happening right now. It's affected everything in my entire life right now. But over time, and Sheryl points that out in the book, as she has worked through the last few years since she wrote the book, since the loss of her husband, and the stories they gathered from people from all over the world in their own facing of adversity and challenge, that this also is something that is not necessarily true in terms of everything for the long haul, every fabric part of their life, every part of their life. The third P, permanence. The belief that the aftershocks of the event last forever. So sometimes people feel like this is it. This grief, this heaviness, this cloud, this storm that I'm in right now will be the rest of my life. And there are going to be times where that you need to be able to acknowledge that. Whoever may be in this situation, you need to be able to acknowledge and affirm that may be where you are right at the moment. But as Sheryl points out throughout the book, Adam adds his insight as well, that often over time, one starts to figure out that it's not forever. There are small pieces of that silver lining that's not there in the beginning that starts to kind of show itself as time moves on a little bit further. So I just wanted to share that with you. I keep telling myself, and I share this with others, that COVID-19 is not forever. It's temporary. These things, everything that's happening in our world right now will not be forever, even though it sometimes feels that way. And so sometimes people say, well, Mike, you're the psychologist. You tell me what the kind of the answers are. Give us some guidance. And I will say, sometimes I feel like it may feel like it's forever. But I still kept, my self-talk is I need to make sure, and I have others reminding me, this is temporary. We need to focus our energies on what we have some control over. And I'll speak to that as we move a little bit further. And that little bit further is now, thank you, Abby, something to hold on to and embrace. So Viktor Frankel, some of you may know Viktor Frankl, he was a Holocaust survivor and was in multiple concentration camps, survived. And he also went on to be one of the most famous Austrian psychiatrists, developed a whole kind of modality of therapy called logotherapy. His focus and concentration is really about finding meaning in life. So this quote really resonated with me. It helped me kind of get a sense of just a perspective through this COVID-19 pandemic that we're all immersed in, even for my own journey. So Victor writes, everything can be taken from a person, but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in a given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. The opportunity to exercise that freedom is available to all of us, and it is the key to finding a way forward in uncertain times. That's unquote. That's from Viktor Frankl. So it gives us opportunity when I say to embrace, focus on what we have some control over, put your energy there. It opens the door for meaning will follow. And David Kessler, back to him, speaks about when you find these sometimes nuggets or little morsels or little pieces of meaning, to make sure you name them. That's part of the embracing. It's part of setting the foundation to finding the silver linings and to finding the meaning through tragedy, loss, adversity. It's that progression that Sheryl shares very, very much in a vulnerable way in her book, along with Adam, her growth from tragedy and the loss of her husband, and others that have shared their stories in there. So another takeaway. I shared this because, again, David Kessler, another conversation that I had seen him or heard from him in a podcast, he shared about, the parable of the long spoons. And he's faced tremendous loss in his life as well. But many of us have experienced losses through this, particularly even the last 6 months. You know your own journey. You can speak to what has happened in your life, and you know exactly what those losses mean to you. So the parable of the long spoons, I'll talk about this, is really about something that when I heard this, I was like, wow, this is how we will get through the storms that we find ourselves in now. So the parable goes like this. There's a gentleman who is escorted into 2 different rooms. The first room that he is escorted into, he's shown into this room. It's a dining hall with a long table, finest linens and serving dishes, and the most amazing food on this long table. All of them had long spoons, much like what you see on the screen in terms of the long handles in every one of the serving dishes. The gentleman turns around into the room and he sees all of these different people. These people are just lifeless, sad, depressed, kind of gaunt-like. And he looks further at them, sees all this beautiful food, these linens, looks at them, and he notices that they can't feed themselves. The spoons are too long. They can't reach their mouths. He's then escorted, that is described as hell. He is then escorted into the next room. The room he enters is very much the same as the last one. The long table, the beautiful linens, the fine china, the beautiful smells of the food, amazing. He turns and looks at the audience and the people in the room, full of people. They're happy. They're full of life. And he takes notice of what the difference is. The difference is the people are feeding each other with long spoons. They're feeding each other. So the takeaway from this, I put one word on this slide, together. And the importance of this is that when we face challenges, adversity, storms, if we find ways to stay together, to lean on one another, to lift each other up, that's how we're going to get through the most difficult times and storms. So that's the parable of the long spoons. Grief and loss, this is tools and tips for support. Okay, we'll go through these and I'll share just kind of these highlights. Be kind to yourself. I think it really needs to start there. So often we can be our own worst enemies. in our own self-talk and how we talk to ourselves, because we do it every day, no matter if we say, no, we don't, I don't do that. We do, and how we think, how we talk to ourselves, our mindset matters. Be kind to yourself. That is just self-compassion, having a little grace for yourself. And I share that with you, and people will say too, well, Mike, you're the psychologist, you should have that, you should be fine in this space, right? And I got to tell you, there are people that need to remind me and say, Mike, you need to be a little bit more compassionate with yourself. We need to start there. Grace for ourselves then leads to the opportunity of being compassionate to others, to other stories, to be empathic, to have grace for others. Take care of the bare basics. The bottom of that pyramid, as I shared with you in the beginning, that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, making sure you have your rest, your fuel, your hydration. I also throw exercise in there, although that was not part of the original pyramid. You need to move. You need to stay active. Take care of those bare basics. Social support, if you look at anything with resilience research, what floats to the top time and time again will be at least one positive, trusting connection. Human, meaningful human connection. Now, I know with social distancing, we have to do things a little bit differently during COVID-19. We need to mask up. We need to make sure we're separating and socially distanced 6 feet and beyond. But we sometimes, just like tonight, we get together, we're together virtually. As long as you have that meaningful connection, it can change the course of one's life. And it's not just that we receive that support, it's that we give it. So research, it's a two-way street, will also show that there are beneficial outcomes to our own health, cardioprotective factors that are in play when we give support to someone, and also when we receive support from someone. Okay, so that's lean on and lift up. Grief and loss strategies continued. Strive to maintain that daily routine. When COVID-19 happened, my team at WellSpan and many teams at WellSpan flipped to a virtual platform. We ended up picking up our stuff and running home, setting up shop at home. That's where I am now. You are in one of my rooms. And so we set up shop thinking that maybe a few weeks we'll be back in the office. 6 months and we're still here. Again, everyone has had challenges and everyone has a story to tell. And so we just need to be empathic about what that might be, because no one truly knows my story unless I share it with them, and vice versa. So being empathic to that, thinking about how do we lift each other up, be patient with one another, to ask about how we're doing, those things are important. But one of the things we had to do when we did all this is, life is very different. How do I set up structure and routine? As human beings, we have less stress and anxiety when we have some predictability, when we have some control over our lives. What happens next? That's set up the daily routine. Practice gratitude. So I mentioned Dr. Martin Seligman, positive psychology. This is part of positive psychology. What am I grateful for? What have I contributed to the day that made a difference in my life? Sheryl Sandberg talked about that. Adam Grant actually said to her, you need to write some things down every night. What did you contribute today in your life? What did you do today? Action. These things then also translate, what am I grateful for? So those things matter. Practice gratitude. Deep breathing, body scans. I will not take you through any deep breathing exercises this evening. We have questions and answers to get to, but it's really about this slowing down, breathing, being in the moment. Sometimes you'll hear people talk about meditation. Sometimes people will talk about mindfulness. Can I be in the moment and not be anywhere else? To be fully present in the moment and to be non-judgmental wherever my mind may go, and to bring it back to my breath. Okay, Abby, the next slide. Limit exposure to news and social media. People will say, well, come on, I need to be informed. I want to know what's going on. I want you to know what's going on. I want you to be informed, but I'm also telling you, if you're not careful, the balance tips in a way that sometimes can turn you upside down. There's so much stimuli out there, so much that in a click, a tap, a swipe, you have unlimited information coming in. This is really just to remind us to not turn it all off. We want to stay informed, but we also want to make sure we find the balance. This next one is reflecting on what has worked for you in the past. What has when you were in a tough spot before, perhaps there was a loss in your life that you went through earlier in your life, a challenge, you faced adversity. What did you do to get through that? Sometimes reflecting on that when we look back can help us now getting through what the challenges are right here in front of us. Develop new skills, sometimes trying to challenge ourselves, to put ourselves out there to try something new, to try something a little different, to try something we may have not thought of before. It creates the possibility of another way to find meaning, to grow, to get stronger. Okay. Sometimes we already know what we need to do. So sometimes we just need to take our own advice. Sometimes we need to be reminded of our sometimes really good thoughts that we share with others that we need to do ourselves. Control what you can, let go that of what you cannot. Focus on what you have some control over. That's where we need to put our energies. It speaks to Viktor Frankel's mind, kind of his speaking on mindset, that we get to choose the course of our destiny in the end. It's the last freedom that no one can take away from us. It's what got him through the Holocaust and everything that he faced during that time. It's what led him to develop the theories of finding meaning in the world of psychiatry and psychology. And last one, ask for help. Sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. This is that part about leaning on one another, lifting each other up. Ask for help. If you need it, if you need something, ask. And if you know someone who may be sometimes just stressed and challenged, that's an opportunity for that two-way street. Let them know, reach out, check in with them. A simple question, simple gesture of kindness and how you're doing, and genuinely meaning that. And then staying with them to hear what's actually what they tell you. That right there can be a mood changer and sometimes a life course changer. Ask for help. Okay. So
thank you. Did you want to go ahead with these?
Yep.
Thank you so much, Dr. Diller, for sharing that. And I want to thank Susan for putting these together. She found this beautiful image of a tree and this quote that it fell a long time ago and it never gave up. So I think that speaks a lot to what we're dealing with right now and what we've dealt with in the past and what we'll continue to experience in our lives. That, you know, as you continue to go through life, you will fall. There are no doubts about that. We're all going to experience falling, trials, and difficulties. But when you look at that tree and you see that could just as easily be a dead stump, but that tree didn't give up. And some days it's just a matter of, today I was able to get out of bed and get a shower, and I did what I needed to get through the day. And you're going to have days like that, and that's okay. And that's why it's important, just to reiterate what Dr. Diller shared about sharing those things, thinking about what did I contribute today, and what you contributed yesterday is not necessarily going to be as overwhelming and wonderful as it was today. And that's okay. You can find something in every day and celebrate that. So thank you, Susan, for that image. We wanted to take a moment just to highlight some of the tips and tools that we found as well throughout the book, Option B, with how we can be resilient during grief and loss. So first thing, just to, and some of these things are just reiterating and talking about the importance of some of the things that Dr. Diller has shared with us. How we grieve and how long we grieve is unique to everyone. So going back to the quote that Dr. Diller shared with us, that each person's loss is the most important and the most challenging loss. Your loss is different. You will grieve different than everyone else. It is unique. So try not to compare yourself to other people and have a time that you should be over this loss, whether that be the loss of a life, the loss of a job, the loss of your daily routine. We all grieve differently. So don't compare yourself. Talk, write, or share about your loss. So for those people who are not very comfortable sharing, get a journal. Write something down. It doesn't even necessarily have to be words. Draw a picture. How did you feel today? What color did you think about today? I was very angry and, you know, orange really spoke to me today. How can you get those feelings out onto paper and express what you're going through to help you deal with those things? Be kind to yourself. We are great at highlighting what other people do and how wonderful they are. We are not so great at saying the same things to ourselves. So think of yourself as that friend, that if you were with a friend who was dealing with a grief or a loss at the same time, what advice would you give them? It wouldn't be, oh, well, I can't believe you didn't do 100 things today. I really thought you would. You were going to be that person who's supporting them and saying, but look what you did. Be kind to yourself, be accepting. And then also return to your normal routine. We talked about this a little bit. As soon as you are able, try to, and even if returning to your normal routine means those 1 or 2 things that you used to do every day, if you need to ease yourself back into that routine, and maybe what you can do is make sure that you are eating lunch at the same time and you always read a book before you go to bed and you haven't done that, start there. Start small and build on that daily routine. I have one more thing to share here, and then we will go to question and answer. So as I'm finishing these up, if you have some questions that you'd like to type into the chat box, please feel free to do so. Also, if you would like to unmute yourself, when I turn it back over to Susan, she'll be facilitating question and answer. So please feel free to go ahead and put some questions in there for us. Know that you are not alone. Let your family, your friends, your coworkers, your support group, professionals, if you are a faithful person, your faith help you. There are lots of people around you. We also talked a little bit about how the people who help others receive a benefit from doing that. So it's not just giving, it's the receiving, being able to help someone else as they are going through a challenge benefits that other person as well. So please don't feel as though you can't share when you are feeling down, when you are feeling low, that I need help. Ask for that and look to those people or those supports around you. List the things for which you are grateful. And they may be, I am grateful that someone held the door open for me today because I had a lot of things to carry in. I was not looking forward to the meeting that I had to go to, and that just really helped me to feel like they saw me and I was supported. So it doesn't have to be this huge thing. I was grateful I didn't hit traffic on the way to work. I only hit 2 red lights. So start small, go from there. And then finally, we've talked about this in other presentations, but we want to highlight it again. Acknowledge those joyful moments and don't be afraid to have them. So that is all I have. I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to thank Dr. Diller again for sharing with us. And she's going to facilitate our question and answer.
Okay, and please, as Abby had said, thank you, Abby, for that nice presentation. As Abby has said, if you have questions or thoughts that you would like to bring up, please go ahead and type it in the chat or unmute yourself. So Dr. Diller, Ellen asks that you share more about the meaning part of the grief phases.
Yeah, I think meaning is really, again, it's really kind of unique to the individual's kind of path and journey also. So it can be challenging to find some type of kind of silver lining and meaning depending on the type of loss, the type of grief someone may be experiencing. But I'll just, Sheryl Sandberg, for example, in her book with the loss of her husband, Dave, talks about the process of writing this book, the process of all the interviews and the sharings that happened to ultimately come up with option B. And then, as she mentions a few times in the book, he'll never be out of her life. He will never be gone from her. But she does see that anyone who may find some benefit from reading this book, option B, is also a part of the legacy and the honor that she had in those years that she spent with her husband, Dave. So that is meaning that if you would have asked her in the first few weeks and months, if she saw that somewhere down the road, she would have never been able to see that. And she kind of alludes to that in the book. But that's just an example there relevant to and related to Sheryl Sandberg and some of her sharing through option B. But I know that even through COVID-19, for example, there have been many losses, many cancellations, many things that have had to change, be altered. And there's with that loss, there's grief to that. At the same time, there have been things that I think people can probably reflect on in the last 6 months that they maybe never foresaw happening in the terms of something that was positive, something that they never necessarily saw a possibility or maybe even thought of or had the chance to do, but were able to embrace. I'll give you a quick example. So on our end, we have a daughter, my wife, and it's myself. And one of the things that I am so grateful for is the opportunity to spend more time together, the time that we've had, that if we would have just lived life without this, life was busy. Life was a whirlwind sometimes. Schedules were crammed. We didn't eat together as much as I would have loved to, the family dinner table. But we have had those moments. We've cooked together more. We've cooked things we never cooked together. So that's just an example of being able to find silver linings and meaning through difficult and adverse challenges that we face through loss. Others can speak to that as well in terms of other losses that they may have had and kind of the journey to find some type of meaning. Again, that will be unique to one's own path.
Okay, David writes, how do you manage the inertia, the paralysis that occurs in the beginning of the process? All of this takes energy, which is often the air that is out of the balloon. So David, I lost my husband in 2014 from ALS, and it was a roller coaster ride for me because I lost my mother in 13, my husband in 14, 2 dogs in 14 and 15, and then my mother-in-law in 15. So I had no air. I had no air in my balloon. And well, for me, my faith carried me through. Every morning, I would stick my foot out from under the covers and I would just say, God, this is as far as I can get today, and I need you to take me the rest of the way. And I got out of bed every morning. The other thing I think that helped me was I had a job, and going to work every day made my life feel normal. It wasn't until I came home and my husband wasn't there that things, came back to reality. But going to work made me feel like I had a place to be and things to do, and I was the old Susan. So how about anybody else? Do you have any thoughts for David?
Yes, I want to add something that I got from the book. And I said this before, but it's just one of the most amazing parts that has relevance for me. And that is that resilience comes from within. It's like a muscle, but it can grow. And it also can grow with support from without. So when the air is out of the balloon, it's when you can reach out for someone else to help you.
Thank you, Karen. That's absolutely true. And that's great advice.
Susan and Karen, I appreciate you both sharing both of those. I mean, Susan, your personal story there, and then also Karen, some of the insights you gained from reading the book. And I think all of that's relevant to speak to Dave's question that he asked, which is a very good one. How do you move forward when you barely have any air to breathe in the balloon? And I think that again it's very difficult to move when you can speak to that. Susan, you spoke to that very eloquently in terms of just what you went through when you lost your husband and after that. And in the years that I had, well, on the personal side and the professional walk of life, they're both intertwined. there had been times where that can be absolutely challenging. So how do you start? Abby mentioned something about just, doing whatever that is to get step one. And Susan, you pointed that out with you. That was getting your foot out from under the covers and then leaning on faith for you. That obviously has been a very important part of your life, to then go from there. And then you build on that. Sheryl Sandberg talked about that too in the book, just taking small steps and trying to regain different parts of her life and putting herself out there and in those places, even when it felt very difficult to do that. And going back to work was one of them for her. And you mentioned that too. It was very helpful, but at the same time, in the beginning, it was very challenging and difficult. But she found strength by being able to go and do those things. And again, it's just one time I was sitting with someone, this was working in the professional context, and I remember saying, I used the cliche of this kind of one day at a time. And she looked at me and she said, Mike, for me today, it's not one day at a time. For me today, it's 1 minute at a time. I never forgot that. That was probably 15 years ago when she said that to me. I never forgot that. And it gave me perspective, again, that empathy to know, or at least be open to someone else's story, to realize that sometimes that's all they can do, 1 minute at a time. And so these small steps can help you gain the strength to then move and start to create a momentum toward healing and acceptance and then meaning. Not necessarily one step at a time in that linear, straightforward fashion, but in a progression that evolves. But we have to start somewhere, like Susan talked about, getting your foot out from under the covers, putting the foot on the ground, and then moving from there.
I think sometimes too, this is Ellen, I think sometimes too that we need to realize if we're not going backwards at the moment, or if we're not going backwards as far as we did the day before, that in itself is a step forward. That, if we're holding steady, if we're still at the edge of the cliff, but we haven't fallen over, that in itself might be the only accomplishment we can count, but it's still an accomplishment.
Yeah. Yep. It's a great point, Ellen. Great point. And I think it's also that reminder that what you did one day may not be the same as the next. And just being able to give yourself some compassion and grace that you're doing the best you can in the moments that you find yourself, to acknowledge that, and then to give yourself that wiggle room to do just that. And your point is well made, Ellen. Thank you.
And I just want to say to David too, that during the week I had work to go to, and on the weekends, and at the same time all this was going on, my son got married and my daughter was going through a divorce. So it was really a hectic, 4 years. And what I would do on the weekends was pretty much nothing. I said, okay, I'm going to do whatever I want to do today. If I didn't want to get out of my pajamas, I didn't get out of my pajamas. I ate a lot of takeout food because I didn't want to cook for myself, or had no desire to cook for myself. And so I let myself just wallow a little bit. And then by Monday, I was eager to go back to work again. But for a while, that process seemed to cycle every week. And I'm happy to say now, 6 years later, with my husband passing, I don't have those cycles. So that's a real positive for me. Rick and Crystal would like to know, how do you help or come beside someone who is struggling with depression during this time and struggling not to turn to addiction and negative coping habits of the past? I'm thinking that the ideas you gave of gratitude and finding some glimpse of joy would be a good starting point. And Rick and Crystal, I know you know my story. One thing that my husband and I did as he was going through the changes that ALS brings to one's body, was that we would talk about what we were grateful for. We had read a devotional book by a gentleman who was an Episcopalian priest, and one of his devotions talked about gratitude. And so he said he would pray, and he would think about what he was grateful for. And one of the things he was grateful for was clean undershirts in his chest of drawers. And you take that for granted. You take all these little things like that for granted. But to us, that was a real eye-opener. And I know that with once Kurt had passed, I would talk about what I was thankful for. And some days it was the same thing over and over and over. But I really started to pay attention to the little things. Anyone else have some thoughts about how to come beside someone who is struggling with depression at this point?
I think that not having any alcohol when you're worried you're going to have too much alcohol, for me personally, is the safest bet. You know, you hear a lot of people come home and they have a beer after work to cope or unwind. Well, the beer turns into 6 and beyond. So for me personally, coming from a family where there's been some dependence issues, abstaining completely and removing yourself from situations where it's going to be temptation is what works best for me. So if you're trying to walk along with somebody who's could go down that slippery slope, I would say avoiding circumstances where alcohol or drugs would be temptations, you know. Going to a restaurant that doesn't serve alcohol as opposed to a restaurant that does, for example.
Yeah, this is David. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
Yep, we can hear you, Dave. Hey, Dave.
Yeah, one thing that struck me in reading this book was the fact that I think it's given that life is full of suffering. The question I had to ask myself is, what am I doing to prepare those resources ahead of time before I hit something like this? Because it's going to happen. So how am I investing in my relationships? What am I doing with my free time? What activities do I participate in that are sort of building some healthy habits and some healthy relationships so that I can feed into those that later when I need to dip into them as a resource, they're available to me. So I think it's really important to recognize that this has to really start for me long before I hit the crisis, so that I have people who will walk with me because I've invested in their lives and been with them. So I think it's kind of the thing that by preparing for, you know, what is definitely coming, even though it's never seemingly adequate, at least you can do something of the things that you can control to help you when you're at a point where you can't control anything. Just a thought.
That was great.
Yeah, great thoughts, Dave. I appreciate you sharing that. I appreciate everyone sharing. I think this is to me what makes this special, coming together and having this conversation. Are there others that would, to David's point, I think that is huge though. The more we can kind of do these things ahead of time, it can help us in times where it's really the worst of times. So David's point was well made in terms of those relationships long before we ever get to a dark place. Looking at how we invest in those, and even, you know, something like practice gratitude. That when we're not in dark times, if we regularly think about what is it that I'm grateful for right now, today, when we do get into a darker time, that's already part of that muscle that Karen was talking about, that we have prepared, that we have built, because that's the mindset that we have developed over time. It takes practice. It's easy to lose sight of what we're grateful for. These small things that Susan talks about, it's easy to lose sight of those. Clean t-shirts in the drawers. So, those things that sometimes we just never think about. The small things sometimes aren't that small. Anyone else that wanted to offer thing? Yeah, Karen.
I wanted to just add something to Rick and Crystal when they were worried about addiction. I know because we've had a lot of addiction issues in my family, and I have a son. I can tell you that AA or NA is, if you have the right support there and the right mentor and the right group to help you, can make the world a difference with that.
Yeah.
I have to say to Rick and Crystal too, that I'm really appreciative of the fact that you desire to come along beside the person who is struggling, because it may seem hard at the moment, but it is so meaningful. We had a friend that asked me if my husband would be willing to go out for pizza with just the guys every other week. And at this point, my husband was in a wheelchair and he couldn't drive. So somebody in the family had to load him up in the wheelchair van and take him and help him eat. And so he went. And this group of guys surrounded us. They surrounded our whole family. And they fed Kurt. They just showed him love. And I am so grateful to have had that experience of that kind of love and sharing. And even my husband's coworkers, his mind was still sharp. He was able to do his job, and he would go into work, and his coworkers would feed him lunch, or they would hook him up to the computer. And it being able to offer someone help when they need it, or to accept their desire to receive help, is such a meaningful opportunity for all involved. And down the road, it's you think back on that situation, and the gratitude, the gratefulness for having experienced that is tremendous. So I commend you for being willing to try. Okay. I don't see any more questions. Oh, Angela and Ellen are recommending the book, The Gratitude Diaries, which was at one point one community book that's you'll be able to find in the library. And that was another really good book to focus on being grateful. Angela or Ellen, do you want to touch upon anything from that book that you remember?
I don't know that I haven't read it recently enough, but it is a book that I added to my personal library because I wanted to go back. It was a lot about perspective shifting. It reminded me a fair amount about a book, A Complaint-Free World, where, the challenge is 21 days without complaining, which is much harder for most people that don't even think of themselves as a complainer. So a lot of it was perspective, which we've talked about here in, looking at gratitude and the joys and finding the small successes.
And Dr. Diller, you had mentioned that silver lining to being home and being, able to spend more time with your daughter and cook with your family. And I know that just hearing from people the changes that have occurred in their lives because of having to be at home. I've heard a lot of positive comments and how, they got outside more. They exercised by, going for walks with their family, which, maybe before they were too tired and just wanted to plop in front of the TV. But, so in some ways, this virus has done us a favor, if I could say that.
I think you absolutely can say that, Susan. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Susan, I appreciate you sharing some of your story. That's very personal. That's not easy to do, and I just wanted to really just share my heartfelt thanks for you being willing to share that with our group here tonight. And thank you for that.
Thank you. Okay. Well, I think that we'll call it a night. And so I'm going to thank Dr. Diller for sharing some great information about being resilient during times of grief and loss. I'm going to thank Abby for forwarding the slides and just talking about the tips from option B in such a nice way. And I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight and participating with us this evening. I'm going to ask you if you would please take a few moments to give us some feedback by completing a survey about the summer read selection. You may find a survey at your local library and complete it and leave it there. Or you can go online to transforminghealth.org and complete a survey. And then while you're there, you can enter to win an autographed copy of option B and also register to attend WITF's A Summer Read Beyond the Pages. This will be another virtual program, but it will be a live program with the authors Sheryl Sandberg and Adam Grant. And it will take place on Tuesday, September 29th at 7 p.m. This is a free event and is open to the public, but we are asking that you register and then you'll get the link to attend the program. Next week, we have another special program that wasn't part of the series or wasn't advertised as being part of the series, but it is a discussion of the book Option B, and there will also be some more discussion about loneliness, adverse child events, and resiliency. So if you're able to tune in, go ahead and register online at yorklibraries.org. Other than that, thank you once again, everybody. Stay safe and stay connected to the library. Good night.
Good night.
Everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Good job, Susan.
Hi, thank you.
Good night.
Enjoyed it.
Okay, thank you.
Be well, everyone.
Good night.